Okay, my name is polydorou. I'm an architect. We have an office here in Nicosia. And what I would like to present today is our proposal for the Cyprus participation in the Venice Biennale. So I decided not to focus on the actual the design proposal. I decided to sort of take a step back and showcase a little bit of our investigation, which leads to these types of designs, because the designing of like knowledge spaces and spaces for collaboration within our period of information technology, digital media and internet is something that we're quite interested in, and it sort of stretches over a broad range of scales of project. The last one, the most compressed size, has been this pavilion. So I thought it was more important to go through our research background. So we find that there's a very clear relationship between technological innovation and the way cities begin to be structured. And so if we see here the traditional medieval city, pre-automobile, we see that very predominant is pedestrian mobility and small proximities, and the archetypal typology of the street and the void for initiators of collaboration, knowledge exchange, unscripted social interactions. The unexpected happens in the interstitial space of the city. This is the old city of Nicosia, and even when you look at the ratio of interstitial space to built space, you see it's almost like 50-50. And you know, the type of events that happen is the agora, or at the end of a cul-de-sac, you have like a workshop. But then with the advent of telecommunications and the automobile, early modernist visions of the city sort of took over, and they sort of changed our philosophy for the new visions of the city. And we see a lot of these effects today. So the street and the void has been diffused and handed over to the automobile. Public space, in that respect, is quite unhospitable, uninhabitable. And the philosophy went towards an idea of mass production. So standardization, categorization, large proximities, separation, repetition. But this is where we are today. We've had a new technological shift, once again, just as valid as the automobile, which is digital media. It's new forms of communication, and we believe that when you create a new form of communication, new agencies of production emerge. So we find that we are in this period whereby the user is changing. He's becoming much more visual-based or audio-based or multimodal-based. But the educational system, which is the epitome of where knowledge production and exchange is supposed to happen, was basically produced on industrialist principles. So you're categorized into year, into subjects, and so on. And it's sort of geared towards a very specific learner type, which is read-write. So you need to read books, you need to take exams, and you're either compatible or you're not compatible. But right now, if we look at the behavior on the internet, we have open sourcing, crowdsourcing, we have complete role reversals. And so the question is, how do we address this issue? How does the physical manifestation of space meet the virtual manifestation of these relationships in our projects? And then, so what we did is we looked at the Free University of Berlin for a number of reasons, because it's an excellent knowledge production machine in Germany, but also because of the design of its campus in the 60s. And so we did a cross-section basically of what is happening. And this is in 2003, when the Free University of Berlin started using digital media in its curriculum. What began to happen is it started being used as monodidactic media. So in order, you can watch a lecture from home, for example. But that very quickly evolved into a feedback mechanism. So you could have response media, which very quickly emerged into the virtual content environment, whereby you could have multiple institutions discussing in virtual space over content. And what we see here is this monodidactic media, and the different student types are different learner types. And where before they were sort of isolated, right? With the advent of response media, question and answer forums, the fact that you can have digital data clouds and so on, it creates a very interesting shift, which is a synchronous response, basically. You can look at something that somebody's done in the past and then restore it for somebody to see in the future. So in a way you have this very rapid conversation with a lot of people in this sort of timeless space. So just as the automobile in the early modernist vision reinterpreted the way that we experience space and time, digital media is doing that yet again, and it's taking us into a virtual realm. And this is when a student is within this content economy of access, when he has like these digital databases of multiple institutions. And then this is the cross-section of actually what is happening at the Free University building. So looking at it, I've identified 3 fields of production. This is the first strata, which I call the street level, which is basically 30,000 students, practically zero financial output from them. And it's bachelor and master students, and they're generally in a very hierarchical top-down system where the curriculum is given to them, and they don't really have the opportunity to feed back into the system. So in a way, they're not knowledge producers, but knowledge consumers in a way, right? But this is the new generation of more diverse user types. These are the people who are on the internet in this really rich environment of collaboration and open sourcing and crowdsourcing, who have the questions and potentially the answers of the future, but we're filtering them through a very rigid industrialist system where, for granted, I take it that you can pick electives and you can diversify and work with another institute or whatever, but it's always between a very strict predetermined formula in a way. But then the next strata is I call it the free radical level, which is basically the researchers, which is maybe 3,000 people, and they have funding of around 300 million. And this is where it begins to loosen up, because they can, this starts to become a really crazy virtual machine in a way. It's a knowledge production machine, whereby research groups formulate, and then graduate schools, interdisciplinary centers form, and the whole time orbiting around, which is up here, orbiting around this knowledge economy of access. You have these like feedback mechanisms of like councils which review your work, and they suggest you making other connections and so on. And this has only been able to have happened with the use of new media technology, especially in the rapid form that it's happening. And then the final category or field of knowledge production is the field of excellence clusters, which is completely new. For example, here, this is a new institution which doesn't have its own buildings, its own staff. It basically symbiotically attaches to a number of institutions, right? This is one example, Topoi, and this is really, again, reinterpreting our understanding of space and time, because it creates these like digital databases of information, and it builds on the past within the present in order to predict the future, with a sense of urgency never before seen before. Like the rapidness of knowledge production within this field is incredible. So I can be somewhere in Africa doing research, and I can have access to the database of my institute or a number of institutes. I can upload my research and somebody has it right away. But the thing is, there is a very high level of exclusivity on this level. A lot of this information doesn't filter back down to the public. And this integration of a collective intelligence driven by content is something that I think we can learn from and can really push us to develop more informed spaces for collaboration. So, and this is the kind of diagram of how we feel people should interact. Which basically what this is within a content economy of access, where a certain event may polarize more events that happen. Perhaps you have a certain lecture that occurs from a student, if there's a certain incentive, or even from a 9-year-old online through Skype or something like that. And what happens is that, for example, a teacher watching that lecture, there's a radical role reversal. We're decategorizing. We're going from a model of mass production to mass customization. This is happening online. How do we do this physically? Okay? Now, that was a Free University, that was a cross-section of the actual academic infrastructure. But if we look at the campus design, the campus is really good because it has a scale of a mini city in a way. So it's the city as a building and the building as a city. And this was a sort of spark in architectural design in the 60s. It was really radical. What they did is they fused the two models of the medieval city and the early modernist city. So they retained the grid, but by creating this permanence, they created a system of, it's called a map building basically. And why map is because it's interwoven. It's an interwoven system of 3 subsystems basically, and it creates a lot of variation and difference. And what it's doing is basically this. This is how the early modernist approach is. So you have maybe the physics department, the maths department, and they're 2 different buildings, and you never really interact in this dead space between them. But what it does is it recognizes the early modernist city on the exterior, but it decides to project its own utopian ideals within its own envelope. And it decides to intermix different disciplinary centers in a network approach. So it creates programmatic overlaps, and it reinstates the street and the void for thus bringing back that social dynamic which was lost. Okay? And this is how it works basically. It's a series of 3 subsystems. The first system is a circulation system. So the orange ones here are the most public accesses, and usually you put like event spaces on there, like theaters and so on. And then the further away you go from this axis, the more private it gets. But this then becomes the foundation in which you can interweave certain buildings. And now the position of those buildings now, because of this first system, we have a range of politicization in a way. And then the final space, which is the one that we're very interested in, is the resulting void space or interstitial space. And the reason why we're interested in this is because if you hold a specific event there or a specific event there, that, depending on the event and depending on what's around it, you create a programmatic tension. You create potential, and you're already within an economy. So, and this is basically an interpretation of what's happening. Event spaces are actually polarizing this field of potential, and this is how clustering is happening of certain programmatic components and how you get overlap. Okay, and this is the void, which here it was like an external space, but we consider it to be internalized, interstitial space where we use to polarize. And I like to call it the hyperspace. Now, this building basically failed. It was designed in order to demount. So if you needed for it to grow, you can just take a few tools, you can take it apart, and you can grow a little bit more. And so it's like a city, it's in constant flux. So it's 4D, it's constantly changing with the changes of the people. So in a way, the architects created like a horizontal system, and they wanted to hand it over to the people so that they can evolve it and evolve with it. But it failed because this horizontality had to negotiate with the vertical hierarchy of faculty, finance, politics. I could never cause the part of the building to change in a way. So thinking as change, as physical change, was doomed from the get-go. But in the 70s, structuralism came about, which said that change can be programmatic. We don't have to actually change the fabric of our environment. It can be content-based, which is precisely the direction that we think it should go. And this starts to go into the direction of our proposal now for the Biennale. A little bit like the hyperspace, we're suggesting a pavilion which moves, and we take the actual city or the actual island or whatever to be our map campus, and we basically begin to hold events in certain interstitial space to create urban polarizations and tensions. I'd like to read something now, very quickly. Right. So it's our belief that any effort, okay, so the Biennale this year, the theme was describe the past 100 years of your city. How has it changed in terms of architecture? So it's looking at modernism and then postmodernism and so on and so forth. And it was our belief that in order to generate an exhibition for the Cyprus Pavilion, for the Venice Biennale, it should equally benefit all Cypriots interested in architecture, whether professional, student, or enthusiast, and regardless whether they have the fortune of participating in the exhibition or traveling to Venice. And that's very close-minded, saying that 10 people can participate and maybe 50 people will go and see it. The second most important aspect of this proposal is that the work generated should not be an objectification of a few months' work, a static showpiece in a stale exhibition space waiting for its expiry date. And I strongly believe that in our day and age, communication is the binding network which enables us to develop frameworks of relationships, which enable self-generating discussions and collaborations to flourish and surpass our imaginations. So in a way, we wanted to create a system which is open-ended, that we didn't know the result, and which could go anywhere. So a network strategy, an open source strategy, an open source strategy. And this is a little brief example of how Cyprus has been participating so far. This is 2008. This is actually participation from our office. It was basically a walkway displaying certain videos, certain experiences. 2010, again, it was static showpieces, showing certain research that had been done, printed, and then displayed. 2012, again, it was a method of displaying certain content, but perhaps emphasizing the actual senses. Okay, and this is our proposal. Our office identified that the majority of Cypriot students, whether in Cyprus or abroad, at some point have the very strong inclination to write about Cyprus in the past 100 years. And they don't necessarily need to be architects. So our idea was to call in all these papers, to start creating like a content database, right? And publish everyone. So we sort of start dealing with social issues like why should only 8 people have it on their CVs? Maybe 1,000 people have it on their CVs. Maybe 1,000 people get published. It's also a method of beginning to really uncover all the different layers that make up a period like 100 years. And the idea was basically that the pavilion is based in Cyprus for as long as we want, and we broadcast the information to Venice. So it's ongoing. We don't have a deadline. It has to be ready in a month and we ship it there. It's something that goes on. It's a pavilion that moves around the city. And the idea was, if certain very interesting papers come in, you can also be invited to give a lecture at this pavilion. We also wanted to select certain research teams which would propose a theme that they want to investigate. And once we selected those research teams, we opened a submission of all research papers. So these people find themselves in a content economy of access. So they have a lot of input of data to help them answer the questions that they're so interested in. Then they come into a next, so they go off and they start doing their research, and then they go into the next collaborative environment, which is when they all come together and they start sharing information, and their research topics start mixing and overlapping, and you're not sure where it's going to go. And the end is, at a certain point, we cross-section the study and we broadcast it to Venice. But it can still keep evolving. And this was our proposal. Our proposal was in a diagrammatic fashion, because it really didn't need to be anything more than that. We even proposed the design team to come and design it. We were interested in developing a system. And we have the Venice pavilion, and we have the Cyprus pavilion, and one is a mirror image, or a ghosted image of the other, which it's basically what we term a hyperspace, and it's building on the street and the event space. So in Venice, what happens is, if you go and find our pavilion, which is really far away from the main attraction spaces, if you pay the ticket to go there and so on, which we think there's not a lot of participants in relation to, I don't know how many people would attend if it was in Limassol. If you manage to get here, we create perhaps a circulation route where we have, you walk around an archive space, where it's like an installation which shows like the excess of this content coming in. It could have been, for example, printers printing a paper every time you receive it, you know? And then in these spaces, maybe it's a live broadcast, maybe it's a broadcast that happened a week ago in Cyprus and was recorded and it's being played back, maybe it's a paper that just came in. And then in Cyprus, what we're doing here is, this is our mobile hyperspace, and it has certain modes of operation. So, for example, here, when it's closed, we have the street space here, which opens up into an event space, and maybe a lot of the research papers that have been submitted are exhibited on these walls, and then an event is held on the inside. The next mode is when it's extending. So, for example, there's an event on the inside, but the space in which we're placing this pavilion is confined. So we start using the secondary skin of this pavilion to basically project itself, creating a wider audience. And the third is when it completely opens. And in this case, we create a loop of information. So maybe here's research papers, maybe here's the slides of the researcher and so on. And for this project, we were fortunate to have the support of the ARTos Foundation, which is always supportive of our, we try to be more progressive in these ideas. And we were in collaboration with MESO, which is a German multimedia design practice, which did this exhibition for Schneider and Schumacher. But unfortunately, and this is if I could send a message out, it would be that we weren't even invited to discuss this proposal. So if we could send a message, it would be that the cultural institutions which are really initiating these types of new collaborations, I believe that they should be slightly more progressive and at least listen to new ideas, because yeah, it seems that we've developed a trend. So thank you.